you can get rid of 90% of your liver and still function. If you get rid of 1% more, you have full-blown liver failure and you die. A lot of people do not understand that being in ketosis doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to lose fat. Why is our insulin elevated? Why is our glucose elevated? We're just treating the number. And that I think we need to get away from, and we need to start focusing on the underlying cause, which everything that you and I have talked about on this podcast is really going to the root cause. If you think about it, a lot of theories that are discounted in the past in the medical community come back around, 50, 100, 200 years later. And for some reason, we realize, oh, you know what? That guy who was saying this was actually right. The monks used to go and meditate and reach nirvana. Well, I'm assuming probably some of that nirvana is because they were in deep ketosis. They weren't eating.
Body, mind empowerment.
Get stronger, faster, smarter, quicker, friendlier, more helpful, more driven.
Everything the body needs.
Control your mind.
Welcome to the Body, Mind Empowerment Podcast. I'm your host, Siim Land, and our guest today is the biohacking doctor, John Lemansky. John is a board-certified physician of internal medicine who has worked with hundreds of patients. His approach focuses on nutrition, and he's a big proponent of the ketogenic diet as well. John, I'm glad that you could make it to the show, and I want to welcome you.
Yeah, thank you, Siim. Really good to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad. So, let's talk about keto, because it doesn't really fit the mainstream narrative or the mainstream dietary recommendations of health and obesity. So how did you get involved with keto, and how did you implement it into your practice?
Yeah, great question. So I've actually been doing a version of keto for 12, 13 years. And you're right, it's not what the mainstream medical community has recommended, but it's starting to change. And I think hopefully soon we'll see that the mainstream will kind of catch up. But my story is I used to be a pretty competitive triathlete, not professional, but I used to do quite a bit of training. And I was very healthy. I thought I ate very well. I was mostly, eating vegetables, lean fish, no fat whatsoever. Very low body fat percentage, muscular. And I had to do some blood work to see kind of for an experiment when I was in medical school. And what I found out was that I had actually developed insulin resistance and I was pre-diabetic. And so at that time, I figured this is wrong. How can this be? So I rechecked the labs, and sure enough, I was still pre-diabetic. And at the time, there wasn't much information out there. I thought I was following, the perfect recommended diet. I was exercising, and so I started going down the path of figuring out, why is this happening? Right? This doesn't make sense. And at the time, not too much information. There wasn't really much on the internet. So I started looking at Atkins and reading some of the research behind that, and started implementing more fat into my diet. And 3 months later, rechecked my labs. Everything had resumed and was back to normal. So that got me thinking, well, maybe there is something more to it than just eat, very, very high vegetable diet with no fat. And since then, it's been a progression where now we're having so much research out there looking at specifically the ketogenic diet. Really good books like Good Calories, Bad Calories by Gary Taubes. And, the science is catching up to what you and I know, which is that saturated fats, healthy fats are actually necessary for nearly every function in the body. And so the last 6-7 years, I've been strictly keto. And it's been basically part of my lifestyle. Since then, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to say that, a lot of people follow the same story in the sense that their health got messed up because of eating the mainstream diet or the standard American diet, or even like the food pyramid diet as well. And and it's funny how to see how going the opposite direction completely improves their health entirely, and it's quite funny to see. What are some?
Yeah, and unfortunately, we've exported it to Europe. So.
Oh yeah, well, I think although Europe has like this sort of a buffer zone that we've seen what kind of results the high grain diet has brought about in the States. So we have more
Yeah,
time to fix it, I think. But what are some of the,
I hope so. Yeah.
yeah, what are some of the diseases you've seen keto has benefited from? Like, do you recommend keto for all of your patients, or are there some sort of maybe genetic differences that you pay attention to?
Yeah, so there are some genetic differences you have to worry about sometimes, but in general, what we're learning is that a lot of these diseases that in medicine we think are isolated. So, if you take autoimmune diseases, we think, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease. If you really look at what the basis is for all these diseases, yeah, you have a genetic predisposition probably, but the pro-inflammatory state from our modern way of living, plus the modern diet, plus all the processed food, really is activating from an epigenetic standpoint all these different diseases. So, like me, a lot of the stories that I've heard from clients or from people I've met in different conferences is the same thing. I had XYZ disease, and nothing worked for me. Medications had horrible side effects, so I decided, hey, I'm going to try this ketogenic diet, and inevitably, majority of people have tremendous success.
Hmm.
And I think it's funny because it's been labeled as almost like a extreme diet, but if you think about it, we're really going back to normal way of eating, right? We're not saying you need to eat 100% calories of fat and forget protein and forget carbohydrates. We're not saying that at all. We're saying it's really balanced nutrition, which everybody can benefit from. If you get away from the premise that saturated fat causes cardiovascular disease, which is really kind of what's driven 60, 70 years of misinformation in terms of what we should do from a medical community. And so I think pretty much the only person, or there's a few situations that I would say you probably don't want to be very, very strict ketogenic: pregnant, breastfeeding, young children. Those you can do more of a modified version, but still have tremendous benefit from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with you that over the course of the last 2 decades, there's been a lot of misinformation about fat, cholesterol, and keto and carbohydrates and all those things. So, have you received any kind of backlash from these traditional doctors who haven't caught up with the latest information and latest research of keto?
Yeah, I wouldn't say backlash. I would say skepticism. So there still is quite a bit of skepticism in the community. And I understand from a medical community standpoint because everything is based on randomized controlled trials. In order to be part of the standard of care and what we recommend for people, you have to be able to document in these randomized controlled trials that yes, this is the benefit. However, having said that, most of these randomized controlled trials are now mostly looking at medications, not dietary, because if you think about it, there's really no money to be made from a ketogenic diet for pharmaceutical companies and big institutions. I do hope that because there are more research studies coming out from people like Volek and Finney and Dr. Westman, that there's more credibility now to ketogenic diet from a medical standpoint, from a randomized control standpoint. And if you look at the studies, and Dr. Einfeld from Diet Doctor also has been showing that all the studies that have looked at a low carbohydrate diet versus a low fat diet, the low carbohydrate diet wins out, hands down, or it's equivocal. So I think as we get more of these research studies that significantly prove what you and I know, the medical community hopefully will follow and start recommending it.
Well, let's hope so, because it takes a lot of common sense actually to understand the simple studies in the sense of looking at the results. Because as we've seen, the food pyramid hasn't delivered any results. It has actually lead to more negative results for people. There are more people who are obese, who have diabetes and stuff like that. And even the doctors themselves, most doctors aren't healthy like you, and they're actually obese and they have diabetes. So you have you and your family, you have like skin in the game. You practice what you preach in this sense, and you're kind of delivering the results, which is funny. And let's hope that it improves, because the definition of insanity is doing the same things over and over again while expecting different results. So the low fat diet hasn't delivered the results. So
People die of common sense.
Yeah, if anything, if you look at, I mean, as you mentioned, the trends in the United States, I mean, obesity this is a pandemic. This is not just in the United States, it's being exported around the world. You know, the number of people who are diabetic and pre-diabetic is 700 million people worldwide. I mean, the numbers are staggering. And so you would think that just based on looking at, we've been recommending this kind of way of eating, and these are the results that we've gotten, you would think that people would say, maybe this is not working out so good.
Right.
But unfortunately, you know, that hasn't happened as of yet. But if you look at some of the guidelines in the United States, they're starting to change. So they're starting to say, okay, you can have some saturated fat. Maybe you need to get rid of the refined processed sugars. You know, Europe guidelines are ahead of ours. And so, you know, I think hopefully we'll catch up. But my concern is, will we catch up fast enough to make this pandemic go the opposite direction? And I don't think that's going to happen because, you know, obesity rates, diabetic rates in our children is also going exponential.
Right.
And so that's my biggest concern. And so you mentioned, yeah, I practice what I preach. My children, my wife and I, we are all, you know, very much into ketogenic lifestyle. And I don't like calling it a diet because I don't think it's a diet. It's a way of living. And then we do, you know, the biohacking to try to offset some of the modern kind of way of living.
Yeah, and I'm also scared for the third world countries or the second world countries like India and China. They're also like starting to show that most of the population is diabetic, and there's going to be another wave of obese people in there as well. And you know, that doesn't go to say that other diets that follow similar principles like keto, like paleo or Mediterranean diet, that they can't work. They can do work, and there are some, you know, maybe like unique characteristics that are similar to the metabolic state of ketosis. So can you like say maybe a few of these kind of key principles of a diet that would maintain health and not make you obese?
Sure. Yeah, so great question. You know, for a ketogenic diet, you have kind of a keto and then you have low carb, high fat. And so if you're using keto for some therapeutic reason, meaning you have epilepsy or you have cancer or you have some autoimmune disease, then I think being strict ketogenic is ideal. But being paleo or being Atkins, I think is fine for a lot of people. My take on it is, if you have metabolism that has been so destroyed by refined carbohydrates, processed food, then you need to go the opposite direction to really kind of try to reset your metabolism. But yeah, I mean, paleo, you're eating quality meat. They recommend, you know, quality sources of products, you know, more in terms of carbohydrates. But again, even with carbohydrates, we have to really step back and say, okay, not all carbohydrates are evil. They're not the evil thing that we make them out to be. But the refined processed foods, 100% you have to get rid of them. And if you look at all these different kind of diets, they all recommend get rid of the processed foods. If you do that, you know, you can eat more carbohydrates if your metabolism isn't completely destroyed and be okay. So yeah, I think there's a lot of validity to most of these kind of way of eating. And if you think about it, they're all kind of going in the same direction, meaning that get rid of the processed foods, focus on high quality food, because, you know, eating protein from a source that is, you know, with hormones and fed a grain diet, you're going to get all that in the meat. And so that's the focus, is also on the quality of the food.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that it's not just calories in and calories out, because you can still get diabetes even if you eat, let's say you eat less calories, but if you eat like these processed carbs and, you know, whatever fits your macros in this sense, you can still get diabetes. And what's the long-term health problems are going to be as well. They're going to be like revealed only after years.
Correct. And the body is very, very smart in the sense that, you know, you can get rid of 90% of your liver and still function. But if you get rid of 1% more, you have full-blown liver failure and you die. Same thing with heart. So our body can absorb so much damage that we don't see it outwardly. And so if you think about it, you know, people who are skinny fat in our country or in Europe and the world, those people are at much higher risk of having significant negative outcomes because people focus on weight. So if you're obese, people are telling, hey, you need to lose weight, you need to see your doctor. Your doctor says you need to lose weight. If you're skinny fat, people don't say that. And
Yeah.
so it's definitely something that calories in equals calories out has also done tremendous amount of damage to us because calories need to be looked at more in terms of their hormonal effect on the body. You know, what do they do to insulin? What do they do to glucagon? What do they do to your stress hormones versus just, you know, I eat 500 calories, I burn off 500 calories, and I'm net neutral. No, not at all. Not at all.
Mm. Yeah, it's good that you mentioned that skinny fat, the skinny fat look, because being skinny fat literally means that your body is starving. You're cannibalizing your own muscle tissue while
Right.
while maintaining the fat tissue, as because your body thinks it's deprived of these nutrients. And yeah,
Correct.
it's a quite, it doesn't fit our way of thinking of what is healthy in this sense.
Yeah, and because and you mentioned something very interesting in that, you know, you can have this situation where you are consuming a lot of calories. Let's say you go to fast food and you eat, you know, one of their meals that's 2,000 calories. Your body will see that there's no nutrients in it, and so your cells are
Yeah.
still sending out signals saying, look, you know, yeah, you had 2,000 calories, but I didn't get any nutrition in my cells. Mitochondria are not getting the energy that they need, and so you're still having signals saying, look, I'm hungry, I need to eat more.
Mm.
And then you go down this vicious cycle of, you know, modern obesity.
Yeah, your body or your fat cells are nourished, but your brain is still starving, and
Correct,
that's a big
correct.
problem. And different foods have different satiety effects as well, which is a good segue
Absolutely.
to talk about one of your recent experiments with Jimmy Moore you did about like consuming high amounts of protein. So can you tell us like
Yeah.
why did you do it and what were the results?
Yeah, yeah. We got a lot of backlash for doing it, but so basically, so Jimmy Moore and I are doing a podcast called the Keto Hacking MD podcast, and what we're trying to show is that a ketogenic lifestyle is extremely important. It's the basis for pretty much everything. But if you just do nutrition in a bubble and you don't start addressing other things in life, that modern life that are affecting us, like sleep, stress reduction, exercise, that you're probably going to stall and not have the degree of success that you're looking for. So
Mm.
one of the experiments that we did was a 3-to-1 protein to fat ratio. So Dr. Ted Naiman sometimes will recommend for a short period of time for his patients to do this kind of diet where you're basically trying to increase metabolism and lose, you know, body fat.
Mhm.
And so we wanted to test this theory because in the keto world right now there is this question of, is protein or fat really the predominant macronutrient that causes satiety?
Mhm.
And one of the things that we've noticed is that with the advent of MCT oils and a lot of these shakes, people are starting to down, you know, high levels of fat calories in liquid form.
Mm.
And yeah, they're getting ketones from the MCT, but is that actually really healthy? And are they going to lose weight, which is a lot of what people do keto for?
Mhm.
And so we wanted to see, okay, does protein cause satiety? Is there a negative outcome from doing a very high protein diet? So the 3 grams to 1 gram protein to fat ratio, and we basically eliminated carbohydrates to try to, you know, get rid of that confounding variable.
Mhm.
In his protocol, he does recommend 30 grams of carbohydrates. So Jimmy Moore is on one scale, you know, still struggling with some weight loss. Does have some insulin resistance, and then on my end, you know, I have very low body fat percentage and no more insulin resistance. And so we wanted to see the different range and what the response would be. So, and we documented this with blood ketone levels and a Freestyle Libre flash glucose monitor. So it's not continuous; you have to put the monitor over it. But I'm so OCD that I checked it every like 2 minutes, so I had a pretty good documentation. And before we started, I did a body impedance analysis. So I have a machine that does basically body fat percentage, lean muscle mass, water weight. And so my body fat percentage was about 8%. So I was very keto adapted. My initial ketone levels were very high in the 4s, and my glucose usually ranges about 60 fasting in the morning. So what I noticed personally was that consuming that much protein, which for me was about 195 grams, and no fat essentially, or very little fat, about 60 grams of fat,
Mhm.
I had precipitous drop in my ketones. My glucose level started going up, and I felt really bad. And so I tell the story that before I became keto adapted, I would eat a meal. Post meal, I would have a hypoglycemic episode. I would have that postprandial stupor. I would feel horrible. And then I would be hungry 30 minutes later, which is classic, right? Since being keto for 13 years, I do not get that experience anymore. I do not get that postprandial stupor. And so when I started eating this way again, that's what happened. I started feeling kind of full, but not in the full sense where I feel keto adapted and I'm just at a good energy level. I had that kind of heavy stomach, and then afterwards I would feel hungry 30 minutes later, and my um, appetite level actually increased. So I was hungry more frequently, and I was starting to think about food again. So I went the 7 days, did add some lean body mass, about 1.5 pounds, and did drop a little bit in terms of fat mass. Although there is some variable degree of uncertainty with the test. So whether or not I actually did that, I don't know. But I felt like I had more muscle mass. But the takeaway for me was that I didn't like the way I felt again. So I didn't like feeling like I was always thinking about food. I was always hungry or having that postprandial stupor. Jimmy, on the other hand, had a much different experience where he became hypoglycemic very quickly and symptomatic from it with his blood glucose in the 50s, still maintaining ketones in the 1 to 1.5 range. He had to eat much higher levels of protein because of his lean body mass. He's 6'3" and he's a bigger guy. But he had a pretty bad experience. And so I think what we were trying to show is that doing high protein may not be a very safe thing if you have insulin resistance and possible glucagon resistance as well.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's
so that's kind
I think like the reason why you experience this hypoglycemia and hungriness is that you kind of kick yourself out of ketosis with consuming that much protein, and that's going to trigger your body to go over into the sugar burning mode again. And because you're eating like zero carbs and little to no fat, then your body doesn't have access to any energy, and basically
Correct.
that's going to cause like maybe even like muscle catabolism in some cases, I would believe.
Yeah, and you get almost it's called rabbit starvation, right?
Yeah.
So the old kind of hunter gatherers knew this, that if they just ate protein by itself, high levels of protein, then they would feel bad, tired. But as soon as they started implementing fat into their diet, and if you do a 1-to-1 ratio, which is essentially ketogenic, then that's a different story, and you could probably consume a higher level of protein without having the impact like I had or Jimmy had. And that's one of the things that I think is not talked about enough, is that the hunter-gatherer society, they would eat mostly the organ meats. They would eat the liver, the adrenal glands, the tongue, the parts of the animal that had the heart that had a lot of fat, and then the lean muscle they would throw to the dogs. So it's important to have this ratio where you need fat, and you need fat for hormone production, for your brain, for every function in the body, but you also do need some protein. And I think my takeaway from it, the positive takeaway, was that I've increased my protein intake a little bit. I was probably underdoing it some.
Yeah, I think like there is like fear amongst keto people that don't eat too much protein because of gluconeogenesis and things like that. But in reality, it's not like a strict line where if you surpass it even by an inch, you're gonna get kicked out of ketosis. There's like quite a big buffer zone in the sense. I could imagine you could consume like in your example, you were saying you consume like 190 grams of protein every day. So I would suggest like maybe if you stay around 170 and 180, you can safely be always in this keto state all the time still.
Yeah, and I think obviously taking into account exercise, activity level, how much fat you're consuming. I do a BMR, so I know kind of my basic metabolic rate around what it is. I'm not trying to lose weight. I'm trying to maintain where I'm at. So I can get into a situation where I can calculate exactly how much I probably can consume. I've done this for so long that I don't need to calculate. And part of what I really like about it is that I know exactly what works for me. So I don't have to sit there and do my macros and calculate unless I'm doing an experiment where then I kind of want to document, okay, this is what's happening. This is what I'm consuming. so that people understand, okay, this is what has changed. But yeah, I think protein, and it's still debated in the internet circles, and I think we're probably overdoing it in terms of how much debate we're doing. I think consume protein. Don't do 300 grams of protein. There's really no need for it.
Yeah.
Protein is not your enemy. As long as you're consuming healthy fats with it, is really the
I
takeaway.
think it's much more healthier and much more effective to be focusing on eating these fattier chunks of meat and
Mhm.
other animal sources rather than putting on extra MCT oil and extra butter
Right.
on top of all of your foods, because it's
Yeah.
promotes other metabolic pathways that are associated with health and lower body fat and things like that.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of part of what I mentioned earlier, where with the really push for MCT products, bulletproof coffee,
Right.
all these products, which I'll be the first to say I have some MCT oil in my morning coffee. Right now, I'm doing more of a matcha tea because I'm trying to get the
Hmm.
antioxidants. But you can have a little bit. Just don't make that your primary source of nutrition, and then skip on the protein because you want to stay in ketosis. I think that's what we're seeing, and especially when you have keto becoming so popular, a lot of products coming to market, and that's the danger. And so I can understand from the protein camp of the guys like Keto Gains and who are promoting more of a one-to-one diet, that you need to have protein. Don't skip out on the protein.
Mhm.
And you see that also in the carnivore diet, that people are really starting to gravitate towards too, because
Right.
that's essentially what they're doing, right? They're doing
Yeah.
1-to-1 ratio, fatty chunks of meat, getting the quality of meat.
Mm.
The other thing I'd like to say, just on in terms of oils, is that, or fats, is that you know we've been telling people that saturated fats are extremely dangerous, but we have to be careful now that we don't just do MCT based oils as our own source of fat. We need to have a wide range of saturated, polyunsaturated, and unsaturated fats.
Mm. Yeah, and I fear like there's definitely a lot of confirmation bias in all camps of this discussion, like especially
Sure.
like the carnivore diet. They're definitely kind of
Yeah.
very, oh yeah, we can eat a lot of more protein and we can eat more meat and stuff like that.
I love protein.
Or you need only a certain amount of protein every day, and any excess doesn't benefit you that much. So
Protein rocks.
Correct. And then the flip side is, what about mTOR activation?
Right.
Is there an issue in terms of longevity? What about, from an ecological standpoint, are we going to be consuming so much meat that it's becoming, detriment to our
Yeah.
environment? So I personally, I'm not opposed to people saying I want to do carnivore versus a Western diet. If you had to choose between the two, carnivore hands down.
Yeah.
For me personally, I like a variety of foods.
Mm.
So I like to have other foods in my diet. And so eating meat, only meat for the rest of my life, I don't think I would like to do that.
Mm. And I also like to think that implementing these different plants and herbs and vegetables, they have like a
Yep.
much more net positive effect on your longevity and your gut microbiome and things like that.
Correct.
By making your metabolism more robust as well.
Yeah, and there are quite a bit of studies in terms of the gut microbe, that having healthy carbohydrates, healthy fiber is essential for them to survive and thrive. People say, well, I'll just take a probiotic and that'll be the answer. And the reality is, most probiotics are just 4 strains, and by the time they get to the colon, which is where you need them, they're all dead anyways because
Yeah.
of the stomach acid and the transition. There are some newer kind of products that are coming to the market that are much higher concentration, and they seem to have some benefit in terms of populating the colon. But I would rather do it from a natural source of healthy carbohydrates like greens, vegetables, asparagus, things like that, where you get more of the micronutrients as well, which are essential.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you get them in a more balanced ratios as well, in a more
Yeah.
natural way. And
Yeah, and I think you really want to go back to eating real food.
right.
Not processed, not trying to hit your macros so you avoid carbohydrates completely. Obviously staying away from the refined products and grains and legumes and stuff like that. But real food is where it's at.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you also support intermittent fasting probably as well, right?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
what kind of fasting do you do?
Yeah, so me personally, I do intermittent fasting every day. 6 out of 7 days of the week, I will usually do about a 24-hour fast. So I eat dinner. I do have some coffee or tea in the morning with a little bit of MCT. But otherwise, for me, again, I'm not doing it for weight loss, but the way that I feel very energetic. I have a lot to do. And so for me, it really helps where I'm basically in fat burning mode. Ketones are effective. My fatty acids are being used for energy. And then when I eat, I'll usually do a workout so that my skeletal muscles, GLUT4 are activated, and so I eat more carbohydrates at that point in terms of vegetables, but I don't get a glucose spike, right?
Yeah.
Because they're slow absorbing, they're combined with healthy fat and protein, and my muscles are ready for food because I've had some glycogen, depletion from fasting and exercise. And then I'll usually do on Saturday or Sunday more of a refeed in terms of I'll eat more food throughout the day because I don't want to be so strictly keto adapted and in hardcore ketosis that I start having some impact on my hormones like thyroid,
Mm.
testosterone. So for me, that's worked very well. And then every 3 or 4 months, I'll do an extended fast.
Mm.
So 5-day fast, water and electrolyte only, more for longevity. So I'm getting up there in age. I'm going to be 40 in September, and I want to make sure that I'm healthy and I can live a normal, healthy, long life. I don't want to be 140, but I also don't want to be 70 and in a hospital, chronically ill. And so the studies that I've looked at look at extended fasting and the benefits in terms of autophagy and mitophagy. And for me, it's actually quite empowering to do it.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of fasting as well. Like it's simply like so easy, it's so effective, and it's like one of the best natural nootropics as well. Like it puts your mind into this deeper,
Absolutely.
deeper ketosis and put it increases your attention and focus and all those good stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I've noticed, looking at what you're up to, you're very busy doing a lot of things as well. And so, it's almost liberating in the sense that you don't have to think about food. You just, okay, I'm doing work. And after you've been doing intermittent fasting and extended fasting, it's actually quite easy. The second day, okay, maybe a little bit of some salivation, but after that, I mean, I really don't get that second day. Oh, I'm gonna
Yeah.
kill everybody because I'm so hungry. I feel great, and then the mental clarity is amazing. And then I'll combine it with biohacking techniques to try to really kind of push the envelope in terms of regeneration of my immune system and repair. So I think it's fantastic.
How do you feel? How does it affect your sleep? Do you get to sleep still?
Yeah. So I noticed you're wearing your Aura ring, and so I use that as well to track my sleep patterns. So I would say after nutrition, sleep is probably the most important thing in terms of being healthy, and it's a vicious cycle. And if you don't get adequate sleep, and not just duration of sleep, but the quality of sleep,
Mm.
one of the most fascinating areas of research right now, I think, is sleep patterns. And so for me, because I used to work as a physician, I would work, they would make us work 36 hours straight. So I was up all night.
Mm.
Sleep for me has been very difficult to get back to the quality of sleep that I need. We are surrounded in our modern society with EMF, with blue light. So we have so many things that are affecting our ability to actually get that deep sleep.
Yeah.
And our solution is, well, here, take Ambien, and then have some crazy tweet in the middle of the night. Um, and so instead of doing all that, we need to focus back on sleep. And so when I'm in extended fasting mode, my deep sleep goes through the roof.
Mm.
So if I can get 45 minutes of deep sleep on a normal day, for me, that's very good.
Mm.
When I do extended fasting, usually it'll get up into the hour and 45 minutes, hour and a half. And then my REM sleep, you'll see very, very long periods of REM where it's like 2.5 hours at a time. So, and I'm sure you've noticed this, that when I wake up in the morning, I can tell you how my sleep pattern was. I don't have to look at the Aura ring anymore
Mm.
because I know intuitively, okay, this is how I feel. I guarantee you I had tremendous deep sleep and REM sleep. And so I've noticed a very, very positive impact on those things.
Mm. Yeah, I also notice similar patterns that during extended fasts I sleep a lot better because I think first of all it may be because of the not having to digest food or anything like
Yeah,
that, and secondly I
absolutely.
also think like it's something to because of being tired, being more tired overall and kind of in this depleted state, so your body simply dozes off more easily.
Yeah. And what I do also is I'll check my HRV, which
Mm.
my heart rate variability. I check it every day, but I'll notice when I'm doing the extended fast, my HRV will go up, much higher,
Mm.
because I think, like you mentioned, you're not digesting food, and so there's not that stressor in terms of trying to digest, and so you're able to really kind of activate the parasympathetic nervous system, and your sleep is much improved.
Have you noticed like how these different foods and diets how do they influence your heart rate variability?
Yeah, I've been doing quite a bit of experiments with that. I have noticed actually you can uh, kind of document specific foods. So, for instance, in the ketogenic world, when people are starting off, a lot of times what I've noticed is that they'll do very, very high dairy as
Mm.
their kind of fat macro because it's easy to get to that fat macro, right?
Yeah.
But dairy can be very insulinogenic, and especially in the United States, based on the cows that we use, they have a lot of casein and lactose. Some people have a hard time with that. So I use it a lot of times with people who have potentially kind of stalled out, and maybe their ESR is high, their CRP is still a little high, and their insulin is still higher than we would expect. So we'll do testing where we'll check, okay, let's say we think dairy is the issue. So we'll isolate it and check a resting HRV in the morning, eat a piece of dairy that we try to keep it where it's, consistent amount. And then we'll check HRV levels, 30 minutes, hour, every 30 minutes for about 4 or 5 hours to see what is the impact. And you can see quite a change in terms of HRV. So it gives you kind of an idea. Well, maybe this is the source of some of the inflammation, the insulin that I need to address. And I've found that it can be quite beneficial. And I know some of the HRV guys who are really dedicated to this are starting to look at ways to document and track specifically with food.
Mhm.
Same thing with high protein. When I was eating the high protein, my HRV would go down
Mm.
because I think it was too much of a inflammatory kind of process for my body, and still was causing some insulin spike. Not dramatic, but some insulin spike to do some of the gluconeogenesis.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very important to kind of pay attention to, or to at least develop this intuition about how different foods affect your specific body. And there are a lot of allergens that potentially may cause
Mhm.
like more inflammation, disrupt your sleep, and change your heart rate variability as well. So it's an important thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can see also as you change your diet, and the microbe is impacted. Sometimes things can be reintroduced and not cause the same
Yeah.
issue as before. So that also I think is important to note that you can modify things as you go along in this process.
Yeah. I totally agree. Coming back to the fasting for a bit, like, do you think it's necessary to combine keto with fasting? Because ketosis is already mimicking the physiology of fasting, and you could gain some of the benefits of being in a fasted state while still eating a keto diet. So, do you think like are there any unique characteristics for both fasting and keto that you need to kind of combine it together?
Well, I think it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So, when we talk about fasting, obviously there's differences, but if you look at being in a ketogenic state as a way to influence your hormones, right? And let's talk about insulin because that's really the main driving hormone. So you really want to suppress insulin to activate your fat stores and use those as your primary source.
Mhm.
You could theoretically be in a state where you're consuming enough calories, mostly fat calories, and you're not burning through your glycogen store where your insulin is suppressed, but you're consuming enough calories where you really are not activating your own fat stores.
Mm.
And so I see this a lot with people who are in ketosis based on their numbers, but they're not losing weight and they're frustrated.
Mm.
In that situation, combining intermittent fasting with a ketogenic lifestyle can kind of push them over the edge where they start actually using their own fat stores. Obviously, when they eat, then they use those energy for or that food for energy, and then they go back into ketosis using their own fat stores. So a lot of people do not understand that being in ketosis doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to lose fat. And so in that situation, I think it's extremely powerful. I still think that if you look at the studies, and Dr. Panda from the Salk Institute looked at this, where if you take the same calories and you combine it within an 8-hour window, right? So they had two groups. One group ate the same calories, but just condensed it into 8-hour window, and the other group kind of ate whenever they wanted to. The group who had an 8-hour window of eating decreased their body weight by about 20% more than the other group. So I think it's extremely powerful. I recommend it for pretty much everybody, but the caveat being that I do not recommend that people go from a Western diet and just say, okay, I'm going to fast for 5 days. It'll be the most miserable experience that they will ever have, because it's not fat adapted, and it takes time for the body, at a cellular level, to actually make the enzymes necessary to start converting fatty acids into ketones. It doesn't happen like that. So you and I, because we're so keto adapted, you could go tomorrow and fast for 5 days and be okay. I have no problems. But somebody who's not used to this will feel horrible. They'll be hypoglycemic. They'll be miserable, and then they'll never fast again. So I think you have to keep it into the context of what your experience is, and do it that way. But for me and my clients, I think it's essential.
Yeah, I think it's a vital part of our ancestral history as well. We never we hunter gatherers never ate a ketogenic diet or something like that. They simply experienced transient ketosis all the time because they ate less frequently, and they experienced like periods of famine and starvation. So they were keto adapted all the time, almost, even while eating, like, let's say, some fruits and berries and stuff like that. And yeah, go ahead.
No, I think that's very important, because we live in an era of convenience, right? So we can get whatever we want at any moment. I used to live in New York, and you could call and say, okay, I want Chinese food, I want sushi, I want Mexican, whatever you want, you can get it in an instance. And so now, we have, food, we have snacks. I mean, you name it. I see people eating nonstop. And so this idea that you have to be consuming food at all times is number one, unhealthy, but number two, from an ancestral standpoint, not how we used to live. So I agree with you 100%. I mean, this is a natural state that you and I are experiencing.
Yeah, I would even dare to say that fasting is more important than keto, in a sense of doing daily intermittent fasting, because if you are eating keto, then you're experiencing like this semi-fasted state even while you're eating. But if you're not doing keto, then you're practically in this constantly fed state all the time, and you're not going to gain the other metabolic benefits of fasting, like reduced inflammation and lower insulin and autophagy and stem cell growth and things like that. So even if you're eating a high carb diet, then it's even more important to do daily intermittent fasting of at least like the 16-hour 8 window.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I think what I'm excited about right now in terms of research is that the research is starting to focus on specific questions that I have, like what you mentioned with intermittent fasting, long-term fasting, ketogenic diets, and their impact on health markers, on inflammation, on hormonal impact, which for me is much more important than just losing weight.
Yeah, totally. So let's talk about some other biohacks as well. You mentioned HRV, so what are some other biohacks you've experimented with?
Yeah, I've pretty much done all the biohacks out there, because number one, I'm interested in the research behind most of them, but I'm also recommending this to people that I work with, and I have to know what it feels like or what the body impact is before I say, hey, you should go do this. So some of my favorites are cold thermogenesis. So I know where you guys are, or where you are, there's a lot of cold water exposure and cold exposure. And the benefits I found are amazing. So I do a lot of cold thermogenesis. I'm traveling right now, so I'll just do ice bags in a bath. But when I'm back home, I tend to go into a cold lake and spend time there. UV sauna work or sauna work, again, I think is one of my favorites in terms of, the benefits from a mitochondrial standpoint. And really, if you think about everything that you and I are discussing, everything that's discussed in the biohacking world, we're all focusing on improving our mitochondrial function, right? So we want to increase density. We also want to make sure that they're functioning properly, and that's part of the fasting, autophagy, mitophagy. But we also want to make sure that they're burning energy more efficiently. And so when you are keto adapted, the fatty acids that are used to produce the ketones are not making as much in terms of ROS, or the reactant oxygen species. So we're getting less inflammation. Everything else that, in terms of biohacking world, the cold, the heat, the fasting, those things are all focused on doing the same thing, right? Decreasing inflammation, improving our mitochondria so that when we utilize energy, we're basically supercharging our mitochondria. So every biohack that I do really I look to see, okay, is there a benefit in terms of my mitochondria? Is there really research to support it? And if there is, then I'll try it. If I see a benefit in terms of markers, I check a lot of lab markers, HRV, then I'll recommend it to people. So those are kind of some of the major ones.
Yeah, it's true. Like the mitochondrial theory of aging is becoming more popular about, what's the root cause of disease, and all the other even like neurodegenerative disease and gut bacteria dysbiosis, they're also all associated with like the mitochondria. So it's
correct.
One of the most important.
Which is interesting. Yeah, and what's interesting is that if you think about it, a lot of theories that are discounted in the past in the medical community come back around, 50, 100, 200 years later. And for some reason, we realize, oh, you know what? That guy who was saying this was actually right. He ended up being in a mental institute because he got shunned by the medical community. But there's so many instances in specifically medicine that we were wrong at the time, and now we realize, oh wow, there really is some benefit. So like, for instance, in terms of mitochondria and cancer function, Dr. Sifrid is really looking and pushing the envelope. Dominic D'Agostino is also looking at exogenous, endogenous ketones and the impact on cancer. And we're noticing that absolutely a lot of this is a dysregulation of mitochondrial function, which is leading to fermentation, which is leading to hormonal signals that are activating probably a genetic predisposition to whatever it is that the person has. But if you can go back to the source and impact the mitochondria, we're seeing benefit in terms of a lot of these disease processes. And so I would do anything that is safe to try to make sure that I'm benefiting my mitochondria and making them stronger.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think it even goes beyond the last few years. Like, you have to kind of look at what people did in the ancient times, like shamans or these Ayurvedic yogis. They also said similar things about how to balance your nervous system and how to kind of maintain youthfulness in this sense. So a lot of we're kind of circling back to all of these different ancestral health practices.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, if we do not understand something, we tend to discount it as, woo science. But if you think about it, I mean, Chinese medicine is 5,000 years old. The monks used to go and meditate and reach nirvana. Well, I'm assuming probably some of that nirvana is because they were in deep ketosis. They weren't eating. And so, yeah, I'm sure there's a spiritual component, being in Zen, but also I'm sure they were in deep ketosis, and that contributed to their ability to reach nirvana. In that setting. So you asked me about other biohacks. So simple biohacks, and what I'm also trying to focus on this side of the world is that you do not need to be a millionaire in order to be a biohacker, right? So it's great to have your own private, whatever you need, $1 million equipment, but majority of the world can't afford that. And so how do you, get healthy again? What are simple things that you can do? Jumping in a lake is, potentially free, right? Having a gym membership and going to use the sauna. If it's not a UV sauna, okay, but you're still going to get benefit from it. Simple things like fasting. Fasting is the cheapest biohack you can have, right? You just don't eat. All
Yeah.
right, problem solved. You're saving money. So instead of focusing on, okay, I want to take a pill to combat every illness that I have, well, no, let's go back and look at things that you can do, right? That are safe, effective, and cheap. One thing that I've been focusing on is meditation and gratuity because those things have been shown, yeah, tremendous impact on overall stress levels, cortisol, insulin. For me, meditation has been very difficult because my brain is always going. And so I've been focusing on that thing. So, simple 5 minutes in the morning, meditation, 5 minutes at night, gratuity. I've noticed, it's decreased my stress levels and I felt much, much more in tune with kind of myself and the world.
Yeah, like the best biohacks and even the most effective ones are the cheapest ones. Like my own top 3 biohacks are like maybe meditation, fasting, and this cold heat thermogenesis, alternating between them. So those are the cheapest ones and the most bang for your buck in this sense.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
it kinds of fit into the idea of the process of deduction and elimination. You eliminate all the potential things that could become distractions and that could lead to maybe inflammation and disease. So because it doesn't matter how many supplements you do take if your fundamentals are still false or faulty.
Right. And it's this idea that, let's take supplements, for instance, antioxidants, all these things that we take and we ingest. You're right. I mean, it's almost like you're using it as a suppressive mechanism where you're kind of affecting the symptoms, but you're not really driving to the root cause of everything that is actually happening. And so simple things like you just mentioned, going out into camping in the wilderness, getting back in tune with the earth, grounding, earthing, simple things like that, which do not cost a lot of money, are very, very powerful to get back to your health and are cheap. You don't have to spend a ton of money to do it.
Yeah, and I think like the problem is that people are being misinformed by the mainstream medicine, and the mainstream medicine isn't designed to treat the individual. It's designed to kind of keep the population in this semi-disease state, so they could profit from them by healthcare and prescribing this different medicine to them.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, so the statin industry, every year they make $36 billion.
That's
So,
crazy.
yeah, I mean, the conspiracy theorists will say, well, they're promoting this, saturated fat is bad, but it's a business. So we need to get away from treating symptoms and actually go into the root cause. And I think when you're just giving medication, so let's take diabetes for instance, which is a very common one. We've been chasing the wrong number. We chase glucose, right? We don't chase insulin. And so we check hemoglobin A1C. If that's elevated, we start treating glucose. We give metformin, right? Metformin actually can affect the mitochondria in a negative way. In the biohacking world, people are starting to use it because they think that it's going to increase longevity. I personally would not use it. But we're not saying, okay, why is our insulin elevated, right? Why is our glucose elevated? We're just treating the number. And that I think we need to get away from, and we need to start focusing on the underlying cause, which everything that you and I have talked about on this podcast is really going to the root cause of what we want to try to accomplish.
Yeah, and I also like in the example of sleep, like the biohacking way would be to improve your sleep by taking some melatonin before going to bed or stuff like that. But the holistic way would be to look at why do you need to take melatonin? Why do you fail to allow your brain to enter into this parasympathetic state and to go into the deeper state of sleep? Maybe you kind of expose yourself to blue light. Maybe you ate the wrong foods. Maybe you're too stressed out because of working too much or something like that. So you have to still take care of the fundamentals and use a minimalistic approach to your health in terms of that.
Absolutely. I'm sure, when you were preparing for the Biohacker Summit, you were probably not sleeping as much as you normally do. But I think addressing all those things that you just mentioned instead of taking melatonin, because if you take external melatonin, you can suppress your own endogenous production of melatonin if you do it for long enough. Studies look at people who take sleeping pills,
Mm.
And number one, you don't actually get into that deep sleep that you really need. Number two, people become addicted to where if they're not taking it, then they can't fall asleep.
Mm.
And same thing happens in the biohacking world. If you just take melatonin and say, okay, well, I'm going to get my deep sleep, well, then you're again not addressing the root cause. Maybe you have your TV on it late at night. Maybe you're on your iPhone. Maybe you have halogen lights that are keeping your melatonin suppressed.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, new research is looking at melatonin production in the pancreas, right? Which is crazy. You wouldn't think the pancreas would make melatonin. Well, if you eat late at night, what happens? You suppress your melatonin. And so what we're noticing is that there's so much interconnectivity in our body. And one of the issues with modern medicine is that everybody has become a specialist. So if you're a cardiologist, all you think about is the heart. If you're a neurologist, all you think about is the brain. Instead of looking at more, like you said, as a holistic approach, which is, okay, everything is connected. So if you eat late at night, not only is it affecting your parasympathetic nervous system, it's impacting your melatonin, so you're not sleeping well. And you get into this vicious cycle where you're not sleeping well, so your cortisol is up, your insulin is up, so you're hungrier, and you're specifically hungrier for carbohydrates. So you eat more carbohydrates, and then you can't sleep well. And it's this vicious cycle that unfortunately we get into, and it's very difficult to get out of. So we have to address all these things as one kind of holistic approach.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I recall like that one night of sleep deprivation is already going to practically make you diabetic the next day at least.
Yeah, and I can tell you from personal experience, when I used to have to work all night, I was starving. I mean, I was miserable, tired, obviously, but I was starving. And I wasn't looking for protein. I wasn't looking for fat. I was looking for simple, quick carbohydrates.
Yeah.
You know those graham crackers? I don't know. In the United States, we have their little graham crackers. And it's basically high fructose corn syrup, flour, and probably some, processed chemicals. I would down those things because my brain was saying, hey, you need to eat sugar. And so I think if we kind of reverse it and start focusing on everything that we've talked about, nutrition, sleep, fasting, other biohacks, you can get back to really kind of suppressing the root cause of all these diseases and make our society actually healthy again.
Yeah, I totally agree. The fundamentals are where it's at. But at the same time, there are still some supplements that do work and that they can be used very effectively. So what kind of supplements do you take?
Yeah. Yeah, after we've said, okay, I do everything naturally, I personally do take supplements, and I do it for a couple reasons. So I'll take an omega-3 supplement because it's very hard in our kind of society to get the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 that we want. Average American will have 1 to 20, so 20 omega-6 to 1 omega-3. We want it to be 2 to 1 or 1 to 1. So I get a very high quality omega-3 from a source that I trust, because if you go to like just the regular store and buy omega-3 off the shelf, it's probably rancid and it probably doesn't have the omega-3 that you want. So it's actually quite dangerous.
Yeah.
So I do take that. I take a salt substitute or salt tablet because I do a lot of exercising, and so I don't want to have muscle cramping. I take magnesium specifically for cramping, but also for mitochondrial function. And I have found that the magnesium that works best for me is actually the topical. So it's a spray, natural magnesium that absorbs better than the oral, and it doesn't give you diarrhea. I've been working with other things here and there. I take niacin as well, and zinc, some vitamin B12 here and there. Let me think of what else. I'm sure I take more, but those are the major ones.
Vitamin D, maybe.
Nope, no vitamin D.
Okay.
No. So vitamin D, my vitamin D levels on our reference range is 60. So I think normal is about 20 or 25.
Okay.
Vitamin D supplementation, maybe for if you're in the Nordic country where a lot of times there's no sun exposure for a lot of times of the year, then yeah, vitamin D supplementation is something that you would want to recommend. I live in California, so it's always sunny. One of the biohacks that we didn't talk about is light exposure, photobiomodulation, which I do a lot of. So I have a Juve light that I use every day because I wake up very early. And so I want to get my circadian rhythm back on its normal rhythm. So I wake up around 4:30, and I'll do the light exposure. But I'll also go out in the middle of the day around noon, and my neighbors probably know this, but I'll be shirtless. I do wear pants, so don't worry. But I want to get as much exposure to light as possible.
Yeah.
But I don't do it for 3 or 4 hours. I don't want to get sunburn.
Right.
But in the medical community, we've told people sun is so evil that you should never get sun exposure. Well, no, that's not true. And you need the sun to actually activate the active form of vitamin D.
Yeah.
So long story, but yeah, basically, if you have adequate sun exposure, you do not need vitamin D supplementation. If you're in societies where a lot of times you don't get sun exposure, then yeah, I mean, it's something you would want to consider.
Yeah, sunlight is another one of those things that tends to get neglected, and it's actually like another one of those pillars of good health and proper
Absolutely.
circadian rhythms.
Absolutely. And the circadian rhythm thing, I know we don't have much more time, but is fascinating. And I think that's one of the areas of research right now where, your gut microbe has a circadian rhythm. Your hormones have circadian rhythm. Even your pancreatic secretions have circadian rhythm. Every organ has its own circadian rhythm. And if you get outside of that circadian rhythm, you're not going to have optimal function of your organs. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And I've really enjoyed talking with you as well. And we're
Yeah, likewise.
starting to wrap this up as well. Like, where do you see the ketogenic diet going in the coming few years?
Yeah, I think it's here to stay. And I think it's here to stay because people are seeing results not only from a weight loss perspective, but from a health perspective. So people are seeing their joints feel better. They don't have arthritis. Their brain function is better. And the research is there now. So people have noticed that this is not a fad. This is not something where you drink 3 shakes a day, consume 600 calories, lose 50 pounds, and you feel like you're going to kill everybody because you're so miserable. This is a sustainable way of eating that's normal, natural, historically relevant. I think the days of saturated fats being the end all be all evil thing that we've created them are gone. My concern is with anything that becomes popular, you start getting product placements, kind of snake oil salesmen that come into the market and just want to push products. So I think as long as we get away from you need to consume these products in order to be in a ketogenic state in order to be healthy, then I think we will be okay. I see it the next phase being a combination of a ketogenic way of living with biohacking, which is really kind of the optimization of our human being. And I see kind of what you guys are doing over on Europe, really pushing the envelope. There's some people on this side that are also pushing the envelope. And I hope to be, one of the people who is a part of the kind of transition of overall health for our population.
Yeah, that's one of the best ways of describing it. That it has to be like a holistic lifestyle, not just diet and
Yep.
everything else. Well, do you have like any other upcoming projects or specific work that you would like people to look out for?
Yeah, so I do the Keto Hacking MD podcast with Jimmy Moore. You can find it on iTunes or wherever it is. I'm working on a biohackmd.com website where basically I'm going out and interviewing all the people in the fields that are specifically in biohacking. So going to the source to see what's the actual research that's there. And then, basically just highlighting things that you and I have talked about where how do you actually implement this into your life? And those are the things that I'm really focused on. I'm coming out with a book probably January, February of next year with Jimmy Moore on the topic of ketogenic lifestyle and biohacking, which I think will be a good guide for people to kind of figure out how to implement this into their life. And, I'm on social media, John Lemansky, MD. Feel free to, ask questions if you have. But it's been a real pleasure, Sam, and thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah, and before I let you go, I want to ask my last question, which is like, what's
Yeah.
this one piece of habit or practice that you wish you'd adopted sooner that improved your body and your mind?
Yeah, meditation.
Hmm.
I think I would, I don't like to describe myself as a type A personality because I'm not, aggressive and stuff like that. But when I say type A, I mean I'm always thinking, I'm always reading, or I'm always engaged in something where my brain is always active. It's one of the hardest things that I've had to work on to slow it down and really just kind of meditate, And so, you know, we tend to, in our way of living, focus on the things that we are good at, right? So we know what we're good at, we tend to gravitate towards that. And we try to kind of eliminate the things that we're not good at. Where the flip side is you probably should be focusing on the things that you're not good at. So for me, that's meditation. So I wish I had been doing that for a lot longer. I think my overall stress levels, cortisol levels would have been improved. But it's something that I'm constantly working at.
Yeah, a lot of people do say that meditation is the one thing, and I myself would have to also say that it is one of those life-changing habits that makes everything else better, and it's awesome.
Yeah, and I've found that I'm actually much clearer in my thinking throughout the day now. So before I have a lot of thoughts and they're all kind of jumbled up. Now I feel like I'm very focused. I'm able to condense my thoughts and act on them much better. So in a way, it's actually more effective throughout the day, which is great.
Take the time and meditate.
yeah, exactly.
Well, John, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm definitely looking forward to more of your podcast episodes, and they're awesome to listen to, and looking forward to a book as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks for having me on. I love what you're doing also, and we'll have to connect again soon.
Yeah, definitely. I'll see you next time.
That's it for this episode of the Body Mind Empowerment Podcast. If you want to support us, then I would greatly appreciate it if you could leave us a review on the iTunes or the other social media platforms. Definitely check out the show notes for the topics that we discussed in this episode. Thanks for listening. My name is Seem. Stay tuned for the next episode. Stay empowered.